It's the most detailed general elections survey ever undertaken in Scotland. 16,000 people were asked their views, and it's a grim outlook for Labour leader Jim Murphy. The prediction, a landslide victory for the SNP. Lord Ashcroft's study looked at more than a quarter of the Scottish constituencies and found the SNP to be ahead in 15 of the 16 seats. Our political correspondent Claire Stewart explains.
It's £2.50 and it's got a really good price.
Jim Murphy should have been selling the big issue for charity this morning, but the Scottish Labour leader pulled out of the press call. Perhaps the party's spin doctors didn't fancy any puns about Labour MPs having to look for a career change, with the latest poll suggesting many of them could be out of a job in May. Lord Ashcroft's survey of 16 Scottish constituencies shows the SNP seizing every single Glasgow seat, apart from the north-east of the city. Further north, the Tory peer predicts the Nationalists would take Gordon and Inverness from the Lib Dems. So that would leave Labour campaign manager Douglas Alexander, Shadow Scottish Secretary Margaret Curran, former Deputy Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar and Chief Secretary to the Treasury Danny Alexander, all looking for a career change on May 8th. So what's caused this apparent swing in seats that were once loyal to Labour? We asked the people of Glasgow East, Margaret Curran's seat.
A bit disillusioned with Ed Miliband. I don't know whether he's the guy for the job, really.
I think there has been a huge swing towards the SNP after the independence election last year.
Labour's not doing much for me at the moment because they don't seem to have clear leadership or strong leadership, whereas SNPs seem to have that.
So who will you vote for in May?
Labour. You've got to vote for Labour. It's one thing will give people their pensions and help people out.
The Scottish Labour leader admits his party has a lot of work to do.
This is a really bad poll for the Scottish Labour Party. It shows we've got a lot of ground to make up. The only people who will be celebrating are David Cameron and the Tories, because this increases the chances of David Cameron being Prime Minister. Because as Scotland knows, the biggest party gets to form the next UK government.
Lib Dem Danny Alexander isn't going without a fight either.
I think what it will say to voters in Scotland is the Nationalists are wanting to use the general election to refight the independence referendum. They're neglecting public services back home. And if you're in Inverness, if you're in the Highlands, you need to rally round the Liberal Democrats because we've delivered for the Highlands. There
was something for the Conservatives too, with only 38% of those polled keen to replace David Cameron with Ed Miliband.
Even in Labour's heartlands, David Cameron is regarded as the best choice by the people of Scotland to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I think it's very difficult news for Labour. Ed Miliband is not resonating.
But have the SNP peaked too soon?
I certainly take nothing for granted. I'll be working very hard with all of my SNP candidates and colleagues to make sure that we're putting forward the best case in the general election and making sure that we keep that level of support and turn it into votes and seats on polling day.
So will Willie Bain here in Glasgow North East really be the last Labour MP left standing in the city? Well, not necessarily. 2/3 of those who were polled said there'd no way they would vote Labour in May, but a third could still be swayed, and that could be just enough for Labour to hold on to seats in the city. This election is only just getting underway. Claire Stewart, STV News, Glasgow.
Well, today's constituency polls confirmed the trend in Scotland-wide samples that the SNP are heading for an historic breakthrough at a UK election. So do they have added significance, given that 16,000 people were polled in 16 different seats? Our political editor, Bernard Ponsonby, takes a closer look at the numbers.
If the Scottish-wide snapshots of opinion predicting meltdown have rocked Labour, this might justifiably induce a mood of panic. Why? Well, the national polls have been used to predict carnage based on a uniform swing across 59 Scottish seats. That's problematic because it doesn't allow for constituency-related factors in determining how people vote. These polls, however, show what might happen in individual constituencies. 14 of the 16 seats polled are Labour-held. The smallest swing to the SNP is still a massive 21% in Airdrie Shotts. The largest predicted swing is 27%, achieved in Dundee West and in Motherwell and Wishaw.
They're right in line with Scottish-wide polls, and I think what they've really done is made people believe what those national polls were saying, which they perhaps hadn't quite come to terms with. But this really makes it very concrete, especially for those MPs who are now under threat.
Just as worrying for Ed Miliband, of those who voted Labour in 2010 but say they will go to the SNP in May, 68% say they have ruled out voting Labour. That suggests that Jim Murphy and his party might claw back some support, but it still points to the loss of most of their seats. And what of the Liberal Democrats? Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, will lose in Inverness near Badenoch and Strathspey, victim of a 25.5% swing to the SNP. And in Gordon, wannabe MP Alex Salmond is predicted to take the seat on a 15.5% swing. And of course, those Scottish-wide polls also predict disaster for the Liberal Democrats. So, what of the health warnings? Well, polls are polls, not actual elections. The formal campaign is still to start and people can change their minds. If Labour have a good UK campaign, might it tempt traditional voters to stick with them if it looks as if Ed Miliband is tantalisingly close to dislodging David Cameron? And these polls are in heartland Labour territory, and they represent a narrow geographical and demographic base. It is not impossible for Labour to be doing better in less traditional areas, places that voted no in September. Now, as polling day nears, tactical voting might occur as savvy voters use the latest information to guide their choice. Polls don't pick up that.
Well, I think if you just took them on their own, there would be a good deal of scepticism. But because they're so clearly in line with what the national polls were saying, it's hard to see them as somehow a kind of blip or a statistical anomaly.
In short, this is more evidence, and perhaps the most persuasive to date, suggesting Scottish Labour will take a mauling at the hands of the SNP come May.
Now, it was